Thank you all for coming out for what we consider to be a really significant historical event in the history of a very historical agency. The Texas General Land Office, which I have to put a plug in for. We're the oldest agency in Texas government still in existence. We started in 1836 when the first land commissioner, a guy named John Borden, was picked to be land commissioner because he did not attend the meeting. And that's literally the truth. We have a copy of the letter basically saying, Henry Smith, then president. I think there's also a letter from Sam Houston saying essentially that, we picked you, you weren't there, we hope you accept this offer. And, other thing that's interesting, the first appropriation for the land office was $3,000, and it was to run multiple county land offices and hire surveyors. And in the final sentence it says, and should there be monies sufficient remaining, land commissioner can pay yourself a salary. So we were fiscally conservative back then. The legislature today doesn't hold a candle to that. But we're here to celebrate, recognize, say thank you, all of the above to Ken and Mrs. Towery for, and I know you, Ms. Towery, I know that you weren't the Pulitzer Prize winner, but you probably had more to do with it than you're given credit for the generosity and for the confidence that you placed in the archives folks here at the General Land Office to donate the papers and documents associated with that Pulitzer Prize winning endeavor back in the 54 and 55 that put a state agency and a statewide elected official very, very high on the skyline, as you say. And I like, I'm an elected official. We're always interested in getting press, but let me just say to folks here at the land office, this is not the kind of press I'm interested in. And it's a little bit tragic because Land Commissioner Bascom Giles in 1947 was the one who came up with the idea and started the Veterans Land Board. And then less than 10 years later was involved in a scandal that basically shook the foundations of Texas government, and rumors abounded that more than just one statewide official was involved in this, and that's never been proven. And all those gentlemen are now deceased. But it's a testimony to where the press, the often and frequently maligned fifth estate or fifth column or whatever you call it, has a role to play in public policy, and how the efforts of somebody, in this case, a young reporter, could we call you young in the 50s? Yeah, yeah. A young reporter who wouldn't take no for an answer, persevered and persisted, and who from a little place in South Texas, the Cuero Daily Record newspaper, not the Post or the Chronicle or the Houston Press or the Dallas Morning News or the San Antonio Express or San Antonio Light or any of those daily newspapers of 50 years ago that had the big staffs and the big dollars and the prestige. None of them had the perseverance and persistence to get to the bottom of something that turned out to be a very big scandal and black mark in Texas government. So I want to make a couple introductions here. Obviously, Ken and Mrs. Towery here on the front row, and you can stand if you wish, or you can sit if you wish. This is your show. I feel like, who was the guy? This is your life. Who was that? Was it Edward Murrow? Yeah, was it Edward Murrow? No, it was somebody else. It was, but anyway. And the person here today who's going to ensure that we do not have a repeat of these events of 50 years ago is Deputy Commissioner and Secretary of the Veterans Land Board, Paul Moore. Your charge, should you accept it, and you have accepted it. Never again. And we also, I want to make sure that our archive staff, Jerry and John, and y'all stand up. This is the archive staff, the Veterans Land Board of the state of Texas here, who are going to be the custodians of these documents, and ensure that they're not tucked away in some drawer, not to be accessible by people who want to see them. Our archives, we encourage and ask for folks interested in Texas history to come see us. It's right across the hall here on the 8th floor. It's going to be moved at some point in the future, remain in this building. I think we're going to the first floor because we want to make it even more accessible. So our archives are for the use of the public. Y'all know the story, but there's more to the story than just the Pulitzer Prize. There's a gentleman who grew up in Texas, who served his country, who was unfortunately at the wrong place at the wrong time in 1942 when the Philippines, became a POW for 3 years, in a Japanese POW camp, and who was deemed trustworthy enough and honest enough to where his fellow prisoners referred to him as and designated him as their chow dipper. And you wonder what a chow dipper was. Well, that was somebody who was trusted enough to be able to have the responsibility to apportion the meager rations that were afforded to the prisoners of war in the Japanese prisoner camp. And Ken Towery was designated as the chow dipper. That was an election that you won, and probably more significant than any election that I've ever won. But anyway, I think I've talked enough. This truly is I'd like to focus on Mr. Towery and his accomplishments and on his gift to the General Land Office. So, Mr. Towery, Ms. Towery, if y'all would like to come up, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jerry. I appreciate it very, very much. And hello, John, and thank all y'all out there. Good gracious, everybody.
There's Gerhardt, too.
Oh, there's Gerhardt. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't see as well as I once did. My right eye doesn't work, and my left one is not quite as good as it once was. So I apologize for that. And you should know too, just to get this thing off right, that my hearing aid dropped out the other morning, and I stepped on it and broke the damn thing. And excuse me. And I got one in my left ear, and then I'm doing just fine other than this. But Louise, you want to sit up here and say anything first?
The only thing I have to say is thank you so much for accepting this and giving it a safe place. And I'm just real happy for Ken and real happy for the family. And I hope that it will be good for everybody. Thank you so much. And for all your hard work. You've just been so nice. I feel like royalty. Thank you.
You are. Well, thank you. You want to go back and sit down?
Okay, thank you.
But because they may want to ask something, and you don't need to stand up for all this, because I feel a speech coming on, and it's going to be for hours. And so, no, really and truly, I too am most grateful for those of you who are here, and I'm most grateful to the Land Commissioner for accepting these things. I know they're not great, and I know there's not a lot, but they do have a bearing on Texas history. And as I said before, I think the history of Texas essentially is a history of its land and the arguments over its land. And I don't care whether you go back to when we were arguing with the federal government over the tidelands, or arguing with Mexico over where the boundary ought to be, or arguing with New Mexico over water rights or whatever. It's been essentially a matter of arguing with somebody about land and the rights attendants there too. And so I think this is an agency that I've always had a fond spot in my heart for. I would have to say, in all honesty, that there's a world of difference between the way I'm treated now here with Jerry and the way I was first treated when I came up here from Cuero, and Baskin was the head of the operation, and I had a little matter I wanted to discuss with him, and he, well, shall we say, he was not candid and forthcoming, and so that started the whole thing, and well, I mean that made the whole thing essentially public to the extent that other people started looking at it and picking it up and running with it. And so in that sense, my first connection with the land office was not all that enjoyable. This one most assuredly is, and I appreciate it. And I think we, if the story about the land itself and the scandals themselves are all been covered and written about, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody might have that we don't get too deeply involved in things. But I do want to say again how proud we are and how grateful we are to all of you for accepting this and looking after it, as it were. because it's, it was a big thing. I know it's not much to anybody else, but it's a big thing for us. The university archives, or whatever the thing is that out here, they asked me years ago if they could have them. And my daughter, who runs our little newspaper in West Texas, she quashed that right away. She said, "No, Daddy, I want those." And so I damn sure, I mean, I'm not going to tell her no. And but she, when she heard about this, the possibility of this, she thought it was great. And she said it just couldn't be better. And I think the same way. I know that like I said earlier, it's not the greatest thing in the world, but it is a slice of Texas history, and I'm grateful that, and we're grateful, the family is, that it has a home now. That, and some of it is kind of interesting. I don't know, there are things here. This reel, for instance, that Murrah reel. It's kind of, I know, we've had it a long time. I got it when I first went to Washington, and well, not when I first went to Washington, but after I was named to go down to to USIA, and we had an advisory panel, they called it, and they met once a year and examined our operation, and then they made a report to Congress and told Congress that we were either doing a good job or a bad job, and we ought to do this different and whatever. But one of the guys on that was a fellow named Frank Stanton, and he was vice president of CBS Corporation, and thought he was going to be the chairman of the board, but Mr. Pauley thought otherwise and cut off his legs, or, well, they basically, anyhow. But when I first saw him, I asked him, because when this thing was aired, after the story and all that, but when this thing was aired, we lived in Cuero, which is about 80 miles, or was actually about 90 miles from the tower. So we really couldn't see it. We had a TV set up, and we were going to watch it and all that stuff. But it was just snow because we were so far away. So I had never seen it, really. And so I asked, I heard about it, heard a great deal about it, but so I asked Stanton if he thought he could get a copy of that, and in a few days, it showed up in the mail, and so there it's here, and come to think of it, I don't appreciate some people's cavalier handling of things. When I got the Pulitzer Prize, for instance, they sent me a letter with a 3-cent stamp on it, inside of which there was a $1,000 check for my work as and I thought that was kind of cheeky. I thought that they should have at least insured it or done something with it, but it was just there. And of course, there was a few other things that made it happy, made it nice, and plaques and pieces of paper and all that stuff with your name on it.
I wasn't too sad to get it for 3 cents now.
Ma'am?
I wasn't too sad to get it, even if it was 3
Oh, well,
cents.
yeah, no, I'm making $75 a week. It was big stuff. And I guess I was making $75 a week then because I'd gotten a raise. I started out at 60, and I remember there's, it's kind of hard to raise a family on. Anyhow, it's all different, and things are different now. But anyhow, I talk too much. I want to say to all of you, thank you very much for your kindness and consideration. And thank you, Mr. Commissioner, for everything. It means a lot to us, and I hope that it will mean something someday to the people of Texas. I know, and it has meant that in the past. It has meant a great deal. And it is good to see some recognition, not of me. I've had more of that stuff than one person ought to have in a lifetime. But I'm glad to see that it is, it's being noted at least, and that in a way, it's sort of come home to rest or roost or whatever. But I appreciate it, and I want to thank all of you for showing up. And if there's anything that I can talk about that'll make it easier for anybody to understand what went on, then I would do that. But otherwise, thank you again. Thank you, sir. But thank you.
Any questions? I know we have some of your, I guess not contemporaries, but contemporary versions of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'd be happy to, but I can understand what it's basically the story is here, and well, it's all here really. It's just a matter of interpreting and looking at it and stuff. It was kind of unique, kind of different. The thing I liked about it, in the way of a story, was that it didn't just end up with somebody going to prison. It ended up with laws being changed, things being improved. There was something, in other words, there was something good came out of it, as well as something of a few things bad that came out of it. And for that, I'm grateful.
You have a question right here? Yeah.
Okay.
How many places did you carry these around with you to? Any idea?
Oh, well, they used to be out at the farm in Knippa. They were in a trunk out there, and then we brought them back up here to Austin, and then we took them to Washington, and then they came back to Norris Drive out here. On I guess, yeah, 'cause somebody else lived in our house on Norris at that time, and it was so trashed out we couldn't. Well, anyhow, we went to a place on Barton Skyway or someplace out there, and we took them there, and then we came down to on Barton Boulevard where we are now, and so they've been around, and she has worried with them, and what we were concerned about, she had a long time ago, we thought, you're doing the right thing, and she put them in plastic and closed them up. And then we find out, well, you shouldn't do that. That's the worst thing you can do for paper. And so that was changed. And the thing is, there is one of the things about it, I'll put it, is we were a small paper, and when the press run is through, the press run is through. You don't gear up for running off more copies, and every copy costs, and so it was a little bit of that involved. But anyhow, when we got through with it, it became I wouldn't say a collector's piece, but there were, the papers of record, so to speak, they had to have copies. So all of a sudden, they're all gone. And the only thing that we had left that the paper had left, paper had none. The only thing they had left at all was what Louise had kept of these private copies. And so I don't even know, of course, when Bill Todd bought the paper, he, years ago, he changed it from a daily into a weekly and moved the press away and did a lot of things. So.
But where we kept them, when he went to Washington, they weren't very old, they were rather new, and it was still a new thing, and it cost a lot to move. They didn't pay your way in those days to go to the job, and so he had gone 3 months before, and I was left to pack up and ship things. Well, I found out it was expensive, so I packed a lot of things in foot lockers and taped them up with tape around them and took them to my father's farm and put it in the barn. It's just a wonder a rat didn't get in there, but they stayed in the barn for a long time. And of course, when we moved back to Texas, we brought them back, and first they were in that Foot Locker a long time. Then after we got a lot of storage where we live now, I took them out and put them thinking I was doing the right thing, in some plastic garbage bags and put them in a cabinet. And then I read, oh, you shouldn't put papers in plastic because you need it in acid-free. Well, we've been pretty busy with everything, newspapers and what have you. I never got them put in acid-free paper, and it's a wonder they're in as good a shape as they are, really. I wasn't as good a curator as I should have been.
Well, I think they're in pretty good shape. The one thing, the reel-to-reel, or the whatever, 8 mm, whatever, I don't know what that is. We've got that on VHS, so folks can view it. And I guess, would they view it here, or can they, do we have enough that we would check that out since it's
Sure, we have multiple copies.
Yeah. And that's the video there is really interesting because it's a video of Edward R. Murrow. Actually, it's a video of when you were sitting at your desk and you got word that you won the Pulitzer Prize.
Yeah.
And it's also the video that has interviews of the whole story and the investigation and interviewing, and it's a fascinating snapshot of 1954 Texas.
Yeah, not to mention the commercials for Alcoa.
Yeah.
Pots and pans. It's just fascinating to me.
It's a fascinating video.
But yeah, the two guys in there, they what happened, they came down to do a story on the paper on our investigation of the scandals, so to speak. And so they did that, and while they were there, though, they had undergone or undertaken some depositions up in Yoakum, Texas, and the two lawyers that came down from Austin, one of them was a guy named Donald Thomas, who y'all may remember was Lady Bird Johnson's lawyer for all these years, and the other was a guy named Ariel Bob Looney, who was the son of Everett Looney, who was Everett, Clark, and Looney made up the big law firm in Austin. And so they were taking depositions there of some of the black veterans. And Murrah's crew, or this crew, they wanted in there to film it, and they wouldn't let them in. So they had a big hassle about it. Well, wiser heads decided, well, they let them in. So they were in there, and they got all that stuff. And it's good. And then they wrapped it all up, and they started back to Washington or New York, wherever they go or went. And they got as far as Houston, and they found out that I was still in the running for the Pulitzer. And so they turned around, they sent the crew back down there. And they set up lights and cameras and everything. And every time the phone would ring, lights would go on and the cameras would start whirling. And so by the time, the end of the day, when the call finally came through, a guy in Houston, a fellow named Jim Mathis, he finally came up here and was a reporter here in Austin for a long time. But Jim, at that time, was in Houston, and they had a reporter up in New York, or wherever it was, and had phoned them. And so he called me and told me that I had won it. And that's what they got on tape. And so it's a sort of a roundabout thing, but it's kind of interesting to me anyhow. And the only thing, I'm a lot better looking now than I was then, and all that stuff. I had hair all over my head and all that stuff. But anyhow, yeah, it was interesting. It was a good story. Yeah,
Don't want to hear his question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Mr. Towery, how does it make you feel knowing that your efforts made such a difference?
Well, I tell you, down deep, it really does make me feel good. Knowing that, like I said, the very fact that you get the award is one thing, which I did not think. I didn't think we were even in that league, so it never entered my mind when I was writing the stories. It was just all I was trying to do is do what I thought a reporter is supposed to do. And so when all that is done and when the whole thing is wrapped up, the thing that makes you feel good about it, and I don't feel good, in other words, I don't feel joy that Bascom Giles or Tel McClarty or anybody else went off to prison. Tell was a friend of mine. He was a Buick dealer down in Cuero, and got involved in all this stuff because somebody he thought it was easy money. But anyhow, he went to prison, and when he got out, I tried to help him get squared away. So it's not that. I mean, the thing that makes me feel good is not just the bad aspects of the story, that is that people went to prison, but that out of the whole thing came some laws that changed the operation of the Veterans Land Board. The make of it was changed. There was a whole bunch of things that was changed that make it very, very difficult. And I say difficult advisedly, but I think it would make it very, very difficult for that stuff to happen again. I know that as long as humans are humans, and I mean, I've learned this. I remember, I apologize for going on and on about this, but I remember very well when this thing was all over, one of my thoughts was, well, that'll teach everybody a lesson. We'll have no more of this stuff in government. And from now on, everything's going to be up and up because they know they can't get away with it. Well, I wasn't up here just a few years, and I was writing about Ben Jack Cage and Billy Saul Estes and John Milton Addison, who I think is the biggest con man that ever came down the pike. And so what I'm saying is that as long as people are people and as long as humans are humans, there's going to be somebody that will figure, well, yeah, they did that and they got caught, but they made a mistake. I won't make that mistake. I'll do it differently. And so if we don't have an honest press, then we're likely, well, I think we're going to have stuff go on anyhow, but whether or not it comes out and whether or not it's made public is going to depend upon an honest press, I think. And I don't mean to get maudlin about it, but I do have a rather fond spot in my heart as well, not only for this agency, but also for the press, what we might call the press. I know the press has changed an awful lot since I was messing around with it. And fact is, I go, hesitate to say it, but I go all the way back to the point where we only had one TV here in Austin. And you know who ran that? Well, they probably don't. Should I tell them? No, I won't do that. But anyhow, it was it was, and I would say that there were some people who were very friendly to each other and protected each other and things like that, which fortunately we'll never have again. But anyhow, I apologize for going on about it. But now, anyone else? Well, thank you very much again for showing up, and I hope y'all recognize, as I do, the importance of this thing. The people here, I know how easy it is, and then I'll quit, but I know how easy it must be for people working in an agency that is not, shall we say, frequented by people who might give it public recognition. They may tend to believe or tend to come to believe that they're unimportant, but I think they are. And I think that no matter what your job is, as long as you do it well, you've made a contribution. And with that, I would say thank you very much, Jerry, for everything.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.